Hello, my name is Melvin Reddy. Thank you so much for joining me as we are talking about an important conversation related to small groups. Very specifically, effectively launching small groups in your local church. And so welcome pastors and leaders and ministers. I believe God is going to help us in this conversation. And so whether you're sitting in a room today, perhaps you're watching this training video, maybe weeks after or months down the road, I want to first of all thank you for investing a very valuable asset, and that's your time. I mean, you're taking time out to do this, and certainly you want to be concerned as well as be aware of what does it take to assist in this process of small group ministries. How do we develop and grow an infrastructure within our church? And so we're here because this important conviction, I believe, is going to be the overriding conversation, and that is this, that life transformation, it happens in circles, not in rows. Life transformation happens in circles, not in rows. And so Sunday morning worship, right? You're in church, you're having great church, the Lord is moving, absolutely an amazing opportunity, right? We've got folks praying, we've got folks a part of what's happening, children's ministry, it's great. I mean, it's wonderful. But rows are designed for listening, circles are designed for connection with other individuals. In other words, doing life together. In the book, Leading Life-Changing Small Groups, Bill Donohue describes community as both the context as well as the catalyst for genuine spiritual transformation. Because community is not a program that supports discipleship from the outside. However, it's actually the very environment in which discipleship actually occurs. And so if we're honest with each other, many of our churches, we suffer from a reoccurring, deeply frustrating cycle. We announce small groups, right? I mean, you get up there after church, you talk about small group ministries, you've got this initiative. I mean, you got a whole bunch of enthusiasm. We build a graphic slide, we print the sign-up cards, we preach a passionate sermon about community, yet within 6-8 months, those groups, they quietly begin to fizzle out, right? You know, momentum begins to drain, leaders begin to burn out, and we find ourselves right back where we started, wondering why our people remain consumers rather than contributors. If you want to change people, you must walk with them. But if you want to walk with them, you got to know where you're going, right? If we want our small group ministries to experience sustainable long-term growth, we can't just simply announce it from the podium, right? The pulpit. We've got to launch it really with a blueprint, an architectural blueprint. And momentum, it doesn't happen by accident. It really is a byproduct of structural clarity. The primary reason for small group ministries is, the reasons why they may even collapse for that matter, is there's a lack of defined boundaries and destinations. So when a church tells its congregation to just get together, just open up your Bibles, fellowship, well, this unintentionally, it creates inward focused social clubs without a clear target. And when that happens, that's when groups begin to just simply drift toward isolation. They become stagnant, and eventually, they turn into pastoral care burdens that really drain you and your team's energy as well as time. Proverbs 11 shares with us, where there is no counsel, the people fall, but in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. And so to prevent structural drift, to protect your congregation, our leadership teams, well, what we got to do is we got to select a very specific track, a framework, if you will, long before the first sign-up sheet is ever formulated. Because hope is not a strategy, it is an intentional model. We've got to have an intentional model. Hoping, thinking they're going to work out, that's just not going to be effective. Because the most effective way to build a healthy, balanced church ecosystem is by launching what has often been called a dual engine ministry model, because to fly straight, maintain altitude to cover long distances, your small group infrastructure, it requires two distinct, perfectly balanced engines working in tandem. We talk about engine one, well, that would be your free market group, designed really for a broad reach. And these groups appeal to church attendees, maybe even some folks that don't attend your church quite yet. These groups are built around affinities, like shared hobbies, okay, common life things. Maybe it's a coffee group, maybe it's a running club, maybe it's a chess club, I don't know, a cooking group, whatever affinity groups, things that you just simply enjoy doing, So a leader, they'd select an activity based on their passion, based on something they enjoy doing, and that really is the primary metric for success. Hey, is it something that you enjoy doing? Can you get some folks to join you in the journey? Free market groups, well, they offer a lower bar of entry. They transform the church from just an intimidating group of strangers, really, into a small, intimate group of friends, right? You're doing life together, you're hanging out together. You can, all of a sudden have shared conversations. And this really does make it easier for a first-time attender to be a part of your church, be a part of your ministry. You can invite your unreached neighbor. And this is a great way that they can step into community for the very first time. And while doing so, this is what we would consider your interest-based groups. And then the next one would be anchor groups. The second engine is anchor groups, designed really for discipleship. Because while free market groups, they focus on community, discipleship groups, well, they focus on spiritual growth. And what's that look like? Well, that's high accountability. That's micro environments, no more than 10 people or so. And they're designed to focus on scriptural study, prayer, sustained prayer, honest conversations. They're not really meant to be like casual, okay? Like not casual hangouts. They're meant to be training ground for spiritual maturity. In the book, The Master Plan of Evangelism, Coleman affirms this method exactly. He observes that Jesus, he didn't try to reach the crowds first. He actually drew a few ordinary individuals together, lived alongside them in community, and then he poured himself into that small group setting. Coleman puts it this way. He says his concern was not with programs to reach the multitude, but with people, with men whom the multitudes would actually follow. And so anchor groups, they're kind of the same premise, intentional. This is where real relational investment happens. This is where you can do leadership training here. This is where member-related activities can grow. And so your immediate action plan then is to define your church's strategic ratio really between these two engines. Then clearly articulate the distinct value to both your staff, your leaders, your lay leaders, your congregation, because the free market group, well, it's meant to be an open door for everybody, an open door for connection. And then these anchor groups, these anchor discipleship groups, well, they're meant to be this deep pathway, and they're meant to be a means for true growth to occur in the life of the believer. And so now that we've mapped out this dual engine strategy, I think there's going to be another hurdle that we're going to have to overcome, and that is this. We've got to now find the right people to actually drive these engines, right? We've got to find the right people to actually drive this bus. And so we move from vision to personnel. We got to also look at how we're going to recruit these people. How are we going to prepare the right leaders? And so when we prepare for a launch of small group ministries, many times we often delay this because we are searching for biblical scholars, right? Licensed leaders, folks that maybe went to Bible college, all right? Maybe they went to Urshan, I'm not sure, whatever. They're going there, and those are the folks that you want to select to be a leader. Well, this actually can be a leadership mistake, because if your prerequisite for leadership is theological perfection, there's a pretty good chance you're never going to launch your small group ministry. I would dare say that we've got to shift our mentality. We've got to shift our mindset entirely. Here's what we got to do. We got to stop looking for the perfect expert, all right? We got to start looking for leaders, individuals who are faithful, who are available, and who are teachable. We're looking for leaders, individuals that can lead a small group who are faithful, available, as well as teachable. Because a faithful leader shows up when they say they're going to show up. They're available when there's, because they've made space in their calendar weekly to care for others. A teachable leader, they don't have to know all the answers, but they're willing to learn and they're willing to be coached. Exodus 18:21 shares with us, moreover, you shall select from all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of 50, and rulers of 10. You see, Jethro, he didn't look for flawless experts. What he did, he looked for people he could trust, as well as people who were capable, people of character who could handle manageable spans of care. And this really ought to be the kind of measuring stick that we consider. I liken it to this. We should be strategic, right? So we need to match a candidate's natural wiring to the group model that they're built for, because you can't put a race car engine into a tractor, right? You can't do that. You can't put, a mentor wired for deep accountability in some social ice cream club and expect him to be happy in just simply doing that. And so for a free market group, you're looking for hosts. You're looking for folks who are relational, hospitable, love to have people around them, or maybe even in their home. They excel at making folks feel welcome, even noticed. You don't have to have a theological degree to do this. You just need an open living room. You got to be willing to, sit across the table and have a conversation with someone. Have coffee or a tea or whatever it is that you enjoy doing, but have a passion to connect with people. Whereas discipleship anchor groups, what you're looking for there, you're looking for mentors, spiritually mature individuals, men, women, young people, highly, high level of integrity, people who love God, love the Word of God. They carry with them a spiritual weight, if you will. They have a high emotional intelligence inside of them. They're willing to navigate the tough questions, the theological questions. They're going to guard confidentiality, and they're going to enforce loving with true accountability. So that's kind of the benchmarks, if you will, for who you're looking for. Now let's talk about the idea of invitation. So let me speak directly to those who are tempted to rely on generic stage announcements or just simply an email blast to recruit leaders. Can I tell you something? Those stage announcements that you're making, that bulletin that you put out there, that email, very rarely will you be able to capture those who are humble or quiet, those quiet people in the church. Chances are they're not going to step up in that moment. I will share this. I found in my experience, sometimes the best leaders are those who don't even think they're ready to step up to lead a small group. I'll catch them in the parking lot, or I'll catch them in the lobby. I'll catch them, right after church, or maybe, we're just having a conversation somewhere, and I'll say, hey, have you thought about leading a small group? Hey, I don't know what that looks like. Well, what do you enjoy doing? Do you like pickleball? Well, why don't you invite a bunch of friends over? Let's just have, let's have a good time. Let's go find a park and let's play some pickleball. Or maybe you like board games, okay, or whatever. Or maybe you like to, talk about the weightier things of life, and you want to do a book study on from David K. Bernard or something. Okay, well, let's do a book study about some theological stuff. Whatever that is, those one-on-one interactions, that's how you're going to attract as well as find the leaders that you're searching for. Now, then the next piece of this is coaching, right? You've got to make sure that you've recruited well. That's kind of half the battle. But then the other part of this is you've got to be sure that you're coaching and you're supporting the leaders that you've actually, invited to the team. And so never deploy a leader into the field without a structural safety net. Never deploy a leader, a small group leader into the field without some sort of structural support group, support net. So here's the deal. If a volunteer, if they feel like they're abandoned by the church or abandoned by the team, the moment that they open up their home, there's a good chance that they're eventually gonna burn out, or even worse, just simply quit in the middle of that small group semester. Even every 5 to 7 small groups that you launch, I would say try to assign an experienced coach to be a person that can support them in this process. 1 Peter 5:2 shares, shepherd the flock of God which is among you, serving as overseers, not by compulsion, but willing, not for dishonest gain, but eagerly. And so the coach's job is not the administrative oversight. It's really care. It's really pastoral care for that small group leader. And, the coach calls those 5, 7 leaders weekly. They're asking, hey, how you doing? How can I pray for you? How can I support you? Maybe help troubleshoot some problems or some crisis things that may have come to the surface, and try to catch those before they have to be escalated to the senior pastor's desk. So there's that initial training that needs to happen, right? So before a small group meets, maybe, host like a 90-minute workshop, a 90-minute orientation. Don't overwhelm those volunteers with heavy administrative policies, or some sort of a lecture. Maybe focus on some practical group dynamics. Maybe how do you select and talk about boundaries in your home? How do you gently redirect someone who might be dominating a conversation? So the hope is that you're equipping your leaders with some basic tools so that they feel confident stepping into their very first gathering, into their very first meeting. But once that first event arrives, how do we keep the actual environment healthy over time? So that's where we move into structuring groups for long-term health. I would say this, that size absolutely dictates purpose. So in ministry, structural size, it naturally dictates behavioral outcomes. Because if the group gets too big, right, then all of a sudden individuality, those small one-on-one conversations, they begin to die out because people begin to hide. A small group is too small. Well, a single family missing a week due to illness, well, it can ruin that entire dynamic in that particular small group. So think about the roster size, think about boundaries based on the engine that you're using. So if you're going to use for instance, the free market group, those can really thrive around the 12 to 15 person mark, even larger, again, depending on where you're heading to, where you're going. So because this size can create some high energy, low pressure when it comes to talking with folks in that social environment. Some casual connections can be made really easily without anyone feeling like they're under a microscope. Whereas discipleship groups, that second engine, these ought to be smaller groups. Usually never any more than 10 individuals. Why? Because these anchor groups, they're designed specifically with discipleship in mind. And so you're trying to really evaluate the group's focus and determine size based on that. And so when we talk about, let's say you're doing a Bible study, Search for Truth, okay? Well, it needs to be small enough that a new convert feels comfortable asking questions. They don't need to be intimidated by so many people that they're going to say, I don't even know, my question seems like a bad question. I don't want to look silly in front of all these folks. So, if it's small enough, they're going to feel comfortable engaging the leader, engaging the content in a way that hopefully will help them grow in the process. Galatians 6:1 says, brethren, if a man be taken over in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself least, lest you also be tempted. Rows are very well for teaching, but they lack that relational capital of a circle. It's within a small group, so that face-to-face circle, that's where humble restoration can occur. Leaders, you're facilitators, right? You're not to be lecturers. Your job is not to re-preach Sunday sermon. We're called to train our leaders, not to rescue the conversation too quickly. We're called to ask open-ended questions, allow folks to examine how the scripture changes their behavior, how they can apply it to a very specific situation, how it's lived out on a Monday morning, right? Because we talk about this on a Sunday. How is this lived out on a Monday all the way through Saturday? Rejoice with those who rejoice, Romans says, and weep with those who weep. We are called to bear each other's burdens in the ministry of this context. And so these are some of the pieces of the puzzle. And then let me share with us next the multiplier effect. A healthy small group ministry, we must have a plan to grow and a plan to reach. We're never, the church was never meant to be a room just simply filled with a bunch of people. It's meant to be a people. We are the church. We're called to be a people who are sent out in our community. And so every small group leader should participate and should be paired with an apprentice leader. In other words, someone that may one day facilitate a group, maybe a co-leader. Just say, hey, this is what I'd like to see happen. Maybe you could lead a discipleship group one day, or maybe you'd be interested in leading an interest-based group soon, right? Because that's how this multiplying effect occurs. Acts 5:42. And daily in the temple and in every house, they did not cease teaching and preaching Jesus as the Christ. And so the early church didn't keep people in one stagnant environment. Actually, they multiplied from house to house. And so we're calling small groups then to have the same kind of expectation, right? Really from the beginning. So you're talking about it with your leaders, you're talking about it with your team, you're introducing the idea that, hey, it's not supposed to be just us four and no more. No, we want to engage our community, engage our church, engage folks on the fringes of our church. And we also want to do so in such a way that it keeps the entire ecosystem of the church running smoothly. The next piece of this is establishing clear expectations. The unknown and unexpressed expectations, things like conflict, resentment, dropouts that can occur in church community. And so we need to have some clear expectations, both for group, for connections. What does this look like in a collective setting? What does it look like individually in groups? So we're doing this because we want to have a lasting and long effect. One of the ways to do this is to set up a semester schedule that groups can follow. In doing so, what we've seen work, at least in our local church, is, for example, we have a summer and a fall term that usually runs 10 to 12 weeks. And then we have a very condensed summer term that runs about 6 weeks or so in July and August. And this helps the church have some natural breaks during holidays, like December, January, starting things off, starting fresh. That's an opportunity for some prayer, some 21 days of prayer and fasting, launching the church. We're not competing with schedules like graduations or folks coming back from school. So, again, some natural calendar kinds of things. Because when people know that the commitment has a clear beginning date and an end date, anxiety begins to drop. Folks don't get all stressed out and they feel a little bit more easy to, man, I think I can do this. I feel like I can jump in and do this. And so, in other words, they don't have to be married to a group for life. They don't have to do any of that. And then these take on a momentum about themselves. And so each group should have a covenant that describes some expectations, maybe a simple document that aligns expectations really from the beginning. And so if a group is to be casual, then talk about, that's fine. Just make sure that that's, addressed initially. The leader, if they expect some sort of, deep preparation or homework or attendance, well, we've got to make sure we set expectations before the group begins and what the leader envisions for the group, as well as those that are entering the group, so that there's no frustration on either side. And so by doing this, this will provide us a means for a group to run smoothly. Here's what Galatians says in all of this, that we're called to not grow weary in well-doing. In due season, we shall reap if we faint not. And when we talk about this from a pastoral perspective, pastors and leaders, now you hold the blueprint, right? This is your call to action. You can move your church from a culture that just simply hopes for community to a church that really has a strategy. You build deep, multiplying kinds of connections and relationships that will build out through either the natural social and elements where we're supporting one another, encouraging one another in the faith, or these kinds of discipleship groups where they're deepening their faith in the Word of God. We can begin to become more organized in this process. This doesn't have to be accidental. And then what we do is now folks in your church move from feeling isolated to really a whole lot more connected to other folks in your local church. And this takes some effort, obviously, some grit. This does take some consistency, a little bit of effort, but ultimately the harvest of individuals, the harvest in your community, the harvest field that really in your church right now, they absolutely need structure, they want community, and they want to grow together. May God bless you. I pray that this conversation about the effective launch of small group ministries has been helpful, and I look forward to connecting with you on other ministry topics again. May God bless.